Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight.
And this is going to help prevent crime and support young people to pick up a paycheck instead of a pistol.
The superintendent of the Chicago Police Department spent the day in Washington to meet with President Biden about violence.
We do not need to give people a third shot.
A possible booster shot, new CDC school guidance. We break down the latest COVID news with an infectious disease doctor.
How Chicago could be more vulnerable than some coastal cities to the dangers of climate change.
And the best weapon against ignorance is education.
Illinois makes history by requiring public schools to teach Asian American history.
I was once a child with a dream. Now I'm an adult in a spaceship.
That's entrepreneur Richard Branson. He wins the race to be the first billionaire to ride his own spacecraft to space. Kind of.
The Illinois-based maker of Weber grills files to go public. That and more from Cranes.
Latinos have a greater risk of developing Alzheimer's, but are less likely to seek help. We explore why.
It's not the objects. It's about us participating together.
And how a new art project at a neighborhood garden in Pilsen is redefining community input. But first, some of today's top stories. After 11 people were killed in Chicago shootings this weekend and more injured, anti-violence is again top of mind for government officials today. Senator Dick Durbin voicing support for several measures before Congress that are aimed at helping communities across the country address rising gun violence.
The American Rescue Plan, which passed the United States Senate without a single Republican vote in support, included funding that communities can use for youth unemployment programs, mental health services, and other strategies to break the cycle of violence.
Durbin also advocated for enforcing existing laws like not selling guns without a background check and keeping guns away from convicted felons and people who are mentally unstable or considered so. And on a programming note, we'll have Senator Durbin on this show tomorrow night. And in just a minute, Amanda Vinicky has more on the meeting President Joe Biden had today with several law enforcement officials, including Chicago's top cop, David Brown. A few vaccinated Illinoisans are now $100,000 richer. The state's Department of Public Health announced 3 people had won today's $100,000 drawing for its vaccine lottery. This time they're from Quincy, Springfield, and Chicago. The first drawing was last Thursday, and with more are on the way, continuing through the end of August. And now, Paris, we'll go back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. And you mentioned that violent weekend in Chicago with 11 people killed in shootings. With that news still fresh in the headlines, Chicago's top cop flew today to Washington, D.C., where he was among leaders in law enforcement who met with President Joe Biden. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda, what happened at this meeting?
Paris, though this is of little solace to Chicagoans and particularly victims, this is a crime wave that is hitting cities across the nation. President Joe Biden late last month unveiled his strategy for fighting it. It is a multi-tiered strategy, and today he held a meeting with law enforcement leaders and mayors, including Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown, to talk about it in more detail. Much of what they talked about was behind closed doors, but not all of it.
Well, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. We know there are some things that work, and the first of those that works is stemming the flow of firearms used to commit violent crimes. And you and I have talked about this, Mayor, before. And it includes cracking down on holding rogue gun dealers accountable for violating the federal law.
Biden's plan also includes federal funding for local law enforcement to use to pay police overtime and to implement community policing strategies, money to fund community interventions, also funding for mental health clinics.
Fourthly, our strategy to fund other vital services like mental health and substance abuse disorder programs, job training, and summer job programs. And this is going to help prevent crime and support young people to pick up a paycheck instead of a pistol.
Now, speaking with reporters afterward, Brown says they did talk about long-term concepts for fighting violence like street outreach and violence interruption. But he says the real focus was on immediate solutions.
We really focused on near-term, making serious consequences a thing that happens in our cities with gun trafficking. Those who create violence in our cities that's happening right now. There was a sense of urgency both from the president and his administration. Both the Attorney General Garland was talking about a sense of urgency. What can we do now, adding resources now to have an impact on violence in our cities?
And upon questioning from the Sun-Times Washington-based reporter Lynn Sweet, Brown also shared that he had a one-on-one with Attorney General Merrick Garland, who grew up in Lincolnwood.
We had some commitments from him to help out with Chicago, and he offered whatever we needed from DLJ. We would get those resources. It includes task force officers. It includes additional prosecutions. It includes fast-tracking investigations on conspiracy cases. These are the people that drive violence in our cities. And so there was a significant commitment. It wasn't just a bland, great thing that you didn't, it was very substantive.
Now, President Biden himself was in Illinois less than a week ago, and he then had his own one-on-one chat with Mayor Lori Lightfoot when Air Force One landed at O'Hare. Biden flew in after the deadliest weekend of 2021 over 4th of July, when Chicago saw more than 100 shootings. Both leaders' teams say that violence was the prime topic of discussion during their tarmac talk. Now, another leg of the White House strategy is deploying 5 so-called strike forces to cities, including Chicago, and that'll be focused on ending gun trafficking. There is still no official word on when those strike forces will be deployed, but both Brown and Mayor Lightfoot today said that they indicated it will be coming soon, perhaps even within days. The mayor, however, this afternoon rebuffed a suggestion that Biden should also bring in the National Guard.
I don't think the National Guard is the kind of resource that we do need. What we need are people that are trained in local law enforcement, and that is folks like ATF, DEA, FBI. Those are the kind of resources that I think would really have maximum impact at this time.
Chicago pastor Anthony Williams recently walked to Washington to bring his attention to anti-violence effort. His son Nehemiah was shot and killed in 2018. And Williams says that America is imploding with crime, that nobody is safe. Yes, he says that anyone who has an illegal gun should be arrested and punished. But he says the president needs to view dealing with crime from another perspective. Specifically, he says, viewing violence as a public health crisis, as a new Illinois law now does. Williams wants Biden to do the same.
The president needs to hear another voice in this country. And I think in Illinois, we have been that voice in terms of getting House Bill 158 passed. And so I would talk with the president in terms of talking about solutions and talking of understanding the symptoms of violence versus it's just the gun. It's not the gun. I've never seen a violent gun, but I see violent people.
Now, meanwhile, Lightfoot says that the president of the local Fraternal Order of Police Lodge, John Catanzaro, was premature Friday when he announced that the city and the police union had, at long last, reached a new deal on a police contract after a 4-year holdout of negotiations. Lightfoot this afternoon saying there is no deal, but she says she and her team do have a proposal to evaluate, and once it is reviewed, she'll have more to say about it. With that, Paris, back to you.
Well, that statement the FOP president put out on Friday was a little bit cryptic because he said there was a deal on the financial part of it. But as you know, Amanda, there's all these other aspects of it, including the consent decree. Yeah. All right, Amanda, busy day in Washington, D.C. and Chicago. Thanks so much. And now to Brandis and whether or not some people need a COVID booster shot. Brandis.
In Paris, the Food and Drug Administration warns the Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine could lead to an increased risk of a rare autoimmune disorder. This as debate rages over whether or not people should be getting a booster shot of the Pfizer vaccine. And the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention puts out new guidance for schools that calls for a full reopening. Joining us to break down the latest COVID news is Dr. Susan Bleasdale, Medical Director of Infection Prevention and Control at University of Illinois Health. Dr. Bleasdale specializes in diagnosing and treating infections. And Dr. Bleasdale, welcome back to Chicago tonight. So, as we just mentioned, the Food and Drug Administration has issued this warning about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine being linked to this rare neurological condition. What do we know about this?
So, we had some preliminary information that we're going to get more formal details in the coming days. but there appears to be some cases that are associated with the Johnson & Johnson or Janssen vaccine, that's the same vaccine, with this rare condition. It's called Guillain-Barré. It's an immune response that typically happens actually after infections, primarily stomach and gastrointestinal tract infections and respiratory infections. So it is something that can happen with the kind of a faulty immune response in response to an infection, and rarely has been associated with some vaccinations in the past. And so there is a signal that suggests that this may be related to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. However, we'll get more details on the confirmation of that data in the coming days.
Now, the rollout of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in particular has been a bit bumpy. What do people need to know when they're deciding whether or not that's the vaccine they want to try to access?
Right. I think, the important thing is to be aware of the data that's out there. There has been some bumps as the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was rolled out. There was some concerns about one of the manufacturing sites. That was addressed very quickly, and I think that overall that's not an ongoing concern. There was previously some concern about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine with this potential risk for, again, sort of an immune-mediated response that caused a clotting disorder. The numbers were very low, but to be aware that this is a very small but rare risk and may be associated, it was reviewed and was quickly reinstated, and we continue to give this vaccine just with some information about this potential risk because there wasn't a definitive association. This is the same thing right now that we're seeing. This syndrome of this potential weakness caused by the immune system may be related to Johnson & Johnson, but also we see some cases of this every year. And there's about 100 cases that have been identified associated with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine right now. But we typically see in the several thousands every year from various reasons. So we'll get some more information. So as you're making a decision about Johnson & Johnson, it's just knowing what that's there, talking with your doctor about it, deciding, is this the right vaccine for me? What's happening in my community? Is there a benefit of a 1-dose vaccine versus the other 2 candidates available that are a 2-dose vaccine to help to make that decision about using the Johnson & Johnson vaccine for you?
Now, the daily average of COVID cases, it's back on the rise. And on top of that, we know Chicago's positivity rate, it's escalating again as well. This time last month, the rate was 0.6% positivity rate. Now it's up to 1.1%. What do we know about driving this increase, both here but nationally?
Probably what we're seeing nationally, the overall increase in the number of cases is primarily fueled by the Delta variant, right? This is what we're seeing. It's becoming more prominent. And you can see pockets across the United States, in particular in regions and areas where there is much less acceptance of vaccination. Unfortunately, we're seeing more cases, and then there is just more spread within that community. And so it's really important that in light of this information around Johnson & Johnson, that we are still working towards getting as many people vaccinated with the candidate vaccines that we have currently, because there is data that the vaccines do provide protection against the Delta variant and will decrease your risk of hospitalization and death. And that's really important, as in some areas where there is significant transmission, they are seeing increases in hospitalizations and deaths.
Now,
we're not seeing that in Chicago, though, thankfully.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, he spoke last night about the possibility of a booster shot. Here's what he said.
Given the data and the information we have, we do not need to give people a 3rd shot, a boost, superimposed upon the 2 doses you get with the mRNA and the 1 dose you get with J&J. But that doesn't mean we stop there. They continue. I mean, there are studies being done now, ongoing as we speak, about looking at the feasibility about if and when we should be boosting people.
It was Dr. Fauci yesterday morning, I should say, but there is confusion about whether or not a booster will be needed, as companies like Pfizer are planning to seek approval for an additional shot. Why is this a debate, Dr. Bleasdale?
Well, I think it's confusing because you're hearing different things as Pfizer is proposing this booster. But I would say as Dr. Fauci has outlined, we have some data right now that shows that there may be some evidence of long-term immunity. Actually, the data is based on the Pfizer vaccine and is likely also applicable to the Moderna vaccine, as they're the same mechanism. And then right now there has been some concern is that, especially in Israel, where they had a very large number of people vaccinated, and they're in the midst of an increase in cases related to the Delta variant, that they're seeing some increased cases. However, it should be highlighted that the preliminary data suggests that those that are having symptomatic disease that are fully vaccinated with the Delta variant are not having as severe disease. And so the vaccine may not be as fully effective for
but it
the
certainly
Delta variant versus others.
Sounds like it lessens, obviously, the opportunity that someone would be severely sick. Really quick, before we let you go, Dr. Bleasdale, new guidance on schools. In a few seconds, what do schools need to be thinking about as we get towards reopening?
Priority is getting our kids back in classes and that we can do it safely. We have data that we've been able to do it in certain pockets throughout the country over the last year. We know vaccine works. That's the really primary goal, get as many people vaccinated that are of age. And those that can't, we use multiple strategies, masking, 3 feet of distance whenever we can, working on testing strategies to help to minimize transmission, and keeping our hand washing and staying home if we're sick. And that'll help us get our kids back in school.
Keep it clean, of course, for students. Thanks so much, Dr. Susan Bleasdale, as always.
Thank you.
And now to Paris and what an explosive new article says about climate change in Chicago. Paris.
Brandon, Chicago would at first glance appear to be insulated from the worst effects of climate change, situated in the middle of the country, near the world's largest freshwater source and nowhere near rising seas. But a much talked about new report in the New York Times pours cold water on that myth. The interactive article shows how erratic water levels in Lake Michigan on top of Chicago's stressed water management system have left the city and its infrastructure vulnerable to potential catastrophic damage. And the story's reporter Dan Egan joins us now. He is the author of the 2017 book, The Death and Life of the Great Lakes. Dan Egan, welcome to Chicago Tonight.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So you write in this article that Chicago is in some ways more vulnerable to the dangers of climate change than coastal cities that are facing gradually rising sea levels. Briefly explain what you mean by that.
Yeah. Basically, if you live in an oceanside city, you do have to worry about a rising sea, but it's also somewhat predictable, storm surges notwithstanding. I mean, they're talking about worst case scenario, if you're on the East Coast, the ocean being 7, maybe 8 feet higher at the end of the century than it is today. You look at what happened to Lake Michigan in the last 7 years, and it went up 6 feet in 7 years. And there's no, physical law that says it had to stop or it would stop. Fortunately, it topped out at record summertime highs last year, and it's dropping back. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a sustained situation. It could pop back up, or it could go down to its record low of 2013 and below. So Chicago, unlike a coastal city, is basically is in a position of potentially having to chase its shoreline. And what that looks like practically is really hard to imagine.
And you write, you use some satellite images in that article showing the historically low lake levels. There's North Avenue Beach here, 2012, and then you have another one here in 2017. And then finally in 2020, so quickly from historic lows to historic highs, where it used to take centuries to accomplish this. Is this fluctuation due to climate change?
Yeah, I know. I mean, these oscillations were basically, it was more decades than centuries, or multiple decades. But yeah, I'm a reporter, but the people I talk to, say that, yeah, the change is the best explanation for what's going on is climate change, and it's really warmer weather. The region's gone up 1.2 Fahrenheit, I think, since 91, and probably not coincidentally, our precipitation has gone way up. You look at any 5-year segment, the last 5-year segment is the wettest 5 years on record. Go back a year. The 5 years prior to that are the wettest. Go back a year. The 5 years prior to that are the wettest. So there's more than a quirk going on precipitation-wise. On the other side of the Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and it seems like Chicago, it just keeps breaking records in spring, especially in May. And then you write about that very memorable rain event last year, and I think we all remember the waves crashing up against the shoreline and eroding a lot of the shoreline. But the other issue here was when the river rises to a really high level and then engineers open the locks to put that outflow into Lake Michigan, it didn't exactly work as planned last year. How perilous was that situation?
Well, it was new and it was dicey, and you know they knew exactly what they were doing. It was basic math. The river needed to be higher than the lake to have any kind of hope that when you opened up the gates, it would make things better instead of worse. I mean, if you opened up, normally they open up the river at a certain threshold, and I won't get into the numbers, but they got about a foot beyond that threshold before they could open up the gates, because had they done it prior to that, the lake would have just tumbled into the river and would have tumbled into downtown. So you had, you know, the city walk was more like a city wade or a city swimming park. Lower Wacker was more like a river. Willis Tower basement was like a swimming pool, knocked power out to the whole place. And you know, people were wondering, why aren't we sending the water into the lake? And it's because the lake would be sending its water into Chicago if they had opened those gates. And that was new. And that was kind of a signature moment and something that I focused on when I was thinking about how to construct this story.
So the basic issue here with these erratic fluctuations is if the lake is really low, it could re-reverse the flow of the Chicago River and have wastewater flow out into the lake. If the lake is too high, then they can't open the locks and drain the river into the lake during these big, heavy rain events, and then that risks flooding downtown. So are there any structural solutions to what appears to be very quick fluctuations to come over the next few years?
I don't know. I don't know. The goal of what I spent the last 9 months doing was to try to figure out how to explain to people the history of Chicago, its you know, its vulnerabilities and its exposure. It's really hard to push water around, but Chicago's better at it than almost any other place, particularly in North America. They have a long history of doing it, but it's going to be a challenge. I mean, when that lake topped out 6 feet above where it was in 2013, it was good that it topped out. Had it gone another foot or two and had that same storm come in May 2020, who knows what would have happened. I mean, theoretically, if the storm surge were high enough, it could have gone over to the top of the lock gates at south of Navy Pier and just sent water into downtown and into the river channel. So I don't think there's any real switch you can flip right now. There's no like, we must do this, but I think there's a lot of, we must try to figure out where this could be headed and what are our best options.
It's a fascinating article, and Dan Egan, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thanks for your time.
And up next, a blossoming community garden and what it has to offer local residents, so please stay with us.
And there's much more ahead on the program, including a look at the billionaire space race. But first, during the pandemic, the El Paso Community Garden in Pilsen served as a home away from home for many. Now with the city back open once again, garden leadership is looking at how they can better utilize the space to serve the community that surrounds it. Arts correspondent Angel Edo introduces us to an artist in residence who's creating a new piece for the garden with a little help from garden goers.
It's like a physical place of abundance where so many people are caretaking together.
Artist in residence Marcela Torres is bringing Pilsen's community together in a new project at the El Paso Community Garden.
Earlier in the year, I was working on this project that had to do with Mesoamerican afterlives, and thinking about how do we think about life and death as it just continues. And after COVID, we're thinking about a lot of ways of grieving, and how is this a process that is cultural and specific to a group of people, but also gives moments of celebration and joy. We're making a tobacco garden and then having these ceramic vessels and ritual offering spaces. Then the other site is an adobe brick monument. So it's a location where people can sit and meditate.
These two new pieces will sit near the garden's entrance. Now, Torres believes including the community in her creative process is crucial.
Pilsen would be a very important place to come and do this project. We know that this space is changing. It's been gentrified and it's not all Latin American anymore, but still like having this cultural site where people can come together, and even if you're not like Latinx or brown, you know, like you can still like give respect to these kind of belief systems.
Paula Acevedo agrees. As co-director, she says the space works to serve everyone. That's why their art classes are just the beginning.
We offer several ways for people to get involved, all kinds of people, all backgrounds, all ages. And so there's the general membership, which could be a membership for beekeeping, membership for gardening. Gardening, we offer allotment beds or the collective gardening beds, which includes like the collective shared beds, the community free food beds, and then a small incubator farm area. We have almost over an acre of land that we are the stewards of, and so everything is volunteer managed, volunteer maintained. We also have now a brand new wellness coalition, which is working on providing a lot more besides yoga and meditation. We have Flamenco Fridays, and this year we are offering a community drawing class. They were also invited to do a community paint day.
And while they work to secure more funding to create more programs and opportunities, Acevedo says they want the community garden to continue to be a gathering space that the family they've created can be proud of.
Essentially, we're an outdoor community center, and so the sky's the limit. As long as there's people willing to put the work in or offer something accessible to the community, this space is for everyone.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
Those two new garden additions are expected to be completed by early fall. Again, the El Paseo Community Garden offers a multitude of free programs, from drawing classes to beekeeping and everything in between. You can visit our website for more information on how to sign up. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, city officials are shutting down a parking garage due to concerns after the Surfside, Florida tragedy. That and more from Cranes. Virgin Galactic's founder Richard Branson wins the race to be the first billionaire to ride his own spacecraft to space, kind of. Governor Pritzker signs a law requiring Illinois public schools to teach Asian American history. We hear from two leaders behind the bill. And Latinos are much more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease than non-Latino whites, but less likely to seek help. We explore why. But first, some more of today's top stories. 27 businesses on the south and west sides are getting a financial boost from the city's Neighborhood Opportunity Fund. The city announced the finalists today, ranging from a shared kitchen in Greater Grand Crossing to a juice bar in Humboldt Park. They'll receive grants ranging from $49,000 up to $1.7 million. The money can be used for new construction or repair projects that improve the business and therefore the surrounding community. The mayor's office says the grant program uses funds from downtown construction projects to support economic development in underinvested neighborhoods.
So these grants are an unapologetic effort of the city to level the playing field by redistributing wealth generated at the center of our city to the south, the southwest, and the west sides. So folks, this is about equity.
And the city has detected its first batch of mosquitoes carrying the West Nile virus for the season. The Chicago Department of Public Health says several tested positive in the O'Hare and Beverly community areas. The West Nile virus is typically spread to humans through infectious mosquito bites, though most mosquitoes don't carry the virus. The majority of folks who contract the virus feel no symptoms, and the few who do experience fever, headaches, and body aches. And for more on how to avoid West Nile, you can visit our website. And now to Paris for some of today's top business headlines. Paris.
Thanks, Brandis. A Chicago parking garage is being shut down for long-delayed repairs in the wake of the Surfside, Florida tragedy. The maker of Weber barbecue grills files to go public, and a major apartment sale signals a quickly recovering downtown market. Here to go behind the headlines is Crane's Chicago business reporter Danny Ecker. Danny, good to see you. With that first story, the city is closing the parking garage at 111 East Chestnut Street after Crane's had reported it was long due for repairs. Obviously, people have the Surfside tragedy in their minds. What exactly is going on with this facility?
Right. So the parking structure is at the bottom of a 57-story condo tower in the Gold Coast. And one of our reporters, Dennis Rodkin, put a spotlight last week on the fact that an engineering consultant back in 2018 issued a report that said that the concrete support columns of this garage had to be repaired as soon as possible. It was a safety hazard. And after the recent building collapse in Surfside, Florida, I mean, the residents in this building were telling cranes that they feared for their safety. Actually, the same engineering firm wrote to the association that owns the garage saying, look, you guys got to get this done. This is still a hazard. Then over the weekend, the city's buildings department said the association agreed to shut down the garage and do the repairs. So apparently that work is being done. But this was a close to home impact, really, of the tragedy in Florida. And certainly, as you mentioned, safety and building maintenance right now are top of mind given the news, especially for anybody that lives in an older high-rise in the city.
Certainly condo associations and city inspectors paying much closer attention to that right now. Another story, Cranes reported, Weber Grills based in Palatine. The company filed for an IPO. Why did it decide to go public, and how much is it worth?
Well, it could be somewhere between $4 and $6 billion. That's according to Bloomberg. And the reason is the company's sales have just been on fire. I mean, Weber reported $1 billion almost in sales in the 6 months ending in March. That was 60% higher than it was for the same period last year, which was pre-pandemic. So people are buying grills, just like they are spending a lot more money on other things related to home life, spending a lot more time at home. And by the way, one of the biggest shareholders in Weber is BDT Capital Partners, a Chicago investment firm. So they could be in line for a nice windfall if the IPO goes as planned.
Interesting. People working from home, people grilling from home a little more, benefiting Palatine-based Weber. Okay, lastly, a San Francisco investment firm bought a two-tower apartment complex in Streeterville. What's significant about this purchase?
So it's McClurg Court. It's a nearly 1,100 unit property on Ontario Street. It just sold for what's said to be close to $200 million, which would make it the biggest sale of a Chicago multifamily property this year. The significance is it's one of the most visible signs so far that the downtown apartment market is really recovering quickly from the pandemic. Occupancies and rents at downtown apartments have been growing at a decent clip after they plunged early in the pandemic. And it's giving investors a lot more confidence in future demand for downtown apartments, which, you know, it's an important indicator when you think about the health and vibrancy of the central business district moving forward.
Yeah, home sales up, and now we see apartment occupancy going well. Good signs for the economy. All right, Danny Ecker, thank you as always.
Sure thing, Paris. Thanks a lot.
Virgin Galactic founder Richard Branson just became the first billionaire to fly his own spacecraft. The winged rocket ship was carried by a mothership to around 50,000 feet before detaching and then blasting to a peak altitude of 57 miles above the Earth. And then it returned to land about an hour later back here. But beyond being the ultimate billionaire's joyride, will commercial space travel take off as an industry accessible to the rest of us? Joining us are local astronomer, planetary scientist, and space enthusiast Mark Hammergren, Alan Root, senior writer at Barron's, where he writes about the commercial space industry, among other things, and Phil McAllister, NASA's director of commercial spaceflight. Welcome all of you gentlemen here to Chicago tonight. Alan Root, how significant is this achievement? Richard Branson and 3 crew members reaching 57 miles in their own Virgin Galactic-built spaceship.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for the question. Now, I didn't want to intentionally throw cold water on this, so I put it like this. You know, in May 2020, Elon Musk, the first U.S. launch, the first crewed U.S. launched in the space shuttle, was retired. You know, he took 2 people to the International Space Station. You know, I called that a 10 out of 10 on the excitement meter. You know, this to me was sort of a 6 out of 10 on the excitement meter. It's very significant, very impressive. That's not to denigrate what just happened. It was very cool. If we call the Branson flight a 6, you know, a normal day in the stock market is a 1 or a 2. So it was another amazing step in the commercial space industry, that's where I put it on my level of excitement.
And Phil McAllister, so we mentioned Elon Musk, SpaceX, and the work that it's been doing with NASA. Why is it important for NASA to contract with companies like SpaceX to do this essential work?
Well, in that case, for the spacecraft that we launch our astronauts to the International Space Station, those are very expensive. They're very technologically advanced systems. So we felt like the best way to go about doing that was through a public-private partnership where NASA could bring our expertise of 50 years of human spaceflight, partner with the private sector who was very conscious of speed and cost efficiency and innovation, and really get the best out of both worlds. And it was very effective. We now have the SpaceX system that can launch people to orbit and to the International Space Station. We've already done that 2 or 3 times, and now we've seen missions for them to sell commercially to orbit. So that was a very effective way for us to interact with the private sector. For the spacecraft that flew yesterday, Virgin Galactic, and one later this month, Blue Origin, those were developed entirely by the private sector.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just saying that's Jeff Bezos' company, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Those systems were developed entirely by the private sector. NASA did not partner with those. So there is no one way for NASA to interact with these private sector organizations. It really depends on the mission or the particular product offering that needs to get developed.
Mark Hammergren, we've mentioned so far the 3 big public faces of these private space companies, Richard Branson, Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos. What are their ultimate ambitions with these endeavors?
Well, they differ, and it's kind of interesting. You look at Richard Branson; he's probably the most flamboyant of the crew, and his goals appear to be the most grounded. Not to use that pun, he's definitely looking at commercial viability of Virgin Galactic. Now, it is due to his eccentric billionaire's pockets that Virgin Galactic was able to take almost 20 years to get up into space with him aboard. The others, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, they seem to be more oriented towards getting humans into a permanent presence in space. Elon Musk, of course, has made much of getting humans to colonize Mars, to spread humanity out there to another planet. But Jeff Bezos has similar goals, getting humanity into space.
And those are the big overarching long-term goals, but Alan Root, I mean, there are other reasons that these companies want to expand into this business, especially in low Earth orbit. I mean, it's not just space tourism for the rich. There are a lot of different functions that they can be a part of, correct?
Right. So, I liken this, the way I would break it down very simply is, you sort of take like the industrial space industry and the commercial space industry. You have a variety of businesses like SpaceX, launch services, small satellites. They want to do Earth imaging. They want to do mobile communications. They want to do low-cost Wi-Fi across the globe. Those are applications that are possible because of falling costs in reusable rockets. And then, those also have benefits in the commercial business or the consumer business and the opportunity for people to become astronauts. Now, not exactly the question, but what I would hope and think would be a great future is not necessarily it only be like a $250,000 ticket for people to get up into space, but for that to come down and it to become like a vacation opportunity for more people. But you have sort of lower costs enabling like a whole bunch of new businesses on, we'll call it the industrial side or the non-consumer side, and then a Richard Branson type enterprise enabling a business on the consumer side.
And Phil McAllister, NASA has been essential to research in so many of these things that we just mentioned. So what kinds of things does NASA plan to partner with these companies and other companies now and in the future to continue this kind of research?
Yeah, we're just starting to scratch the surface on that. These capabilities were not available to NASA prior to just this year. So we have just begun a program to determine what might be appropriate for us to use these suborbital spacecraft for. You can imagine doing some scientific experiments with that 3 or 4 minutes of microgravity. You could also do it for sort of tool development. If you want to take a tool or some sort of mechanism up to the International Space Station, you want to make sure it works in microgravity, because you don't want to take it all the way up there and have to bring it back if it doesn't work. So you could use these 3 or 4 minutes of microgravity to make sure that these tools or mechanisms work. You could also see it for maybe true crew training. We have a very good training program for NASA astronauts, but you could see maybe using this 3 or 4 minutes to maybe practice putting on a spacesuit or a glove or some other type of crew activity. So there's a myriad of ways we think we could leverage these capabilities. And the good thing about it was NASA didn't have to develop this ourselves. That's what I think we at NASA really see this as being advantageous. Previously, we had to build everything ourselves. It just didn't exist. Now, with the private sector taking on this responsibility and developing these capabilities themselves, we can just buy a ticket just like everybody else. And we think that's pretty cool. So, and these companies, deep pockets and a lot of innovation that can happen. So, Mark Hammergren, back to the space tourist part. Alan Root mentioned it's $250,000 to fly on this Virgin Galactic flight. I think Jeff Bezos sold an auction ticket for $28 million. Do you think this will ever come down so the rest of us can afford this one day?
Well, looking at Virgin Galactic, I think Virgin Atlantic is a good comparison here. People can spring for international plane travel. So families can do that kind of thing. That's in the realm of ordinary people. So then you go to like specialty cruises, okay, maybe an order of magnitude, 10 times the cost. That's what people might be able to spring for. You do another 10 times that to 100,000, that begins to be very, very rarefied. So I think the price is going to have to come down by at least a factor of 10, if not more than that, to be really opening up to the public. So it's not just a race to space, but it's a race to bring that price down and to innovate so that more people can enjoy those few minutes up in low microgravity, as you put it there. Very fascinating. All right, our thanks to Mark Hammergren, Alan Root, and Phil McAllister. Nice to talk to you. And up next, Illinois makes history by requiring public schools to teach Asian American history. So please stay with us.
Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
Asian American history will now be taught in Illinois public schools. The governor signed the Teaching Equitable Asian American Community History Act into law on Friday, making Illinois the first state in the U.S. to do so. This comes amid a rise in anti-Asian hate crimes during the coronavirus pandemic. Joining us to discuss the legislation are State Representative Jennifer Gong Gershowitz, who was the chief sponsor of the bill, and Grace Pye, Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice of Chicago, which supported the legislation. Welcome, both of you, to Chicago Tonight. Welcome back. So, Grace Pye, let's start with you, please. The U.S. has seen a rise in anti-Asian hate crimes and violence throughout the pandemic. Did any of this serve as a catalyst for your work on this legislation?
Absolutely. The rise in anti-Asian racism was certainly a motivating factor for why we introduced this legislation when we did, and I think why we saw such a groundswell of support in getting it passed. I think we have seen such a rise in violence. A lot of people are feeling afraid to go out into their communities, and a lot of community members want to know, what are we doing to combat that violence? And so for us, requiring Asian American history to be taught in public schools is a proactive getting at that problem and combating the harmful stereotypes and discrimination that can ultimately lead to violence.
Grace, what does it say to you that Illinois is the first in the nation to do this, that no other states have done it?
Honestly, I'm just so proud that Illinois can be the first, that we in the Midwest are leading on this issue. A lot of times people expect coastal states with maybe larger Asian American populations to be leading, but I think that speaks to how important it is to Illinoisans, to really be the most inclusive, to kind of take leadership in making sure that we are teaching our young people the full and inclusive history of the United States.
Now, at the signing of the bill on Friday, Illinois State Superintendent of Education Carmen Ayala spoke about what she said has been left out of history lessons. Let's listen.
But for too long, history education, the official ledger of those contributions, has been incomplete and therefore has been inaccurate. Culturally inclusive and responsive education empowers all our students to learn about the diverse communities that make our state so great.
And Representative Gongershowitz, you introduced this legislation in January. How do you think it'll impact a student's understanding of American history?
Yeah, so TEACH is fundamentally at its core about building empathy. Empathy comes from understanding. We cannot expect to do better unless we know better. And when Asian Americans are missing from our classrooms, what fills that void are harmful stereotypes. And then others start to act on those harmful stereotypes. So TEACH is about teaching about who Asian Americans are so that fundamentally we build empathy and understanding.
And of course, when you say TEACH, that is the acronym for the law, Teaching Equitable Asian American Community History Act. If you see all those letters spelled out, then that's what you get. So Friday, State Senator Ram Villavelam said as a student in Illinois growing up, he remembers the impact of not learning Asian American stories. Here he is.
I was the only youth in my class that was Asian American, and I had those questions myself and my peers did of who am I, who is my community, what are we about, what's our history here. And as was mentioned, those questions were left unanswered in some cases, and then in other cases, wrong assumptions were made.
And back to you, Representative. What impact do you hope this legislation will have on the Asian American students in Illinois?
Well, what I can say from my own personal perspective is that learning about Asian American history has helped me gain a deeper understanding of who I am and where I fit in the larger context of American history. I think it's important to remember that Asian American history is American history. But despite being a graduate of Illinois public schools, I didn't learn anything about Asian American history till I was in law school, when I studied the constitutionality of the Chinese Exclusion Acts and the incarceration of Japanese Americans in the 1940s. So teaching equitable Asian American history, the TEACH Act, is about making sure that the next generation of Asian American students won't need to attend law school in order to learn something about their heritage.
And Grace, Asian American communities, they're often seen as a monolithic group. What impact do those myths and those stereotypes have on Asian Americans?
Well, I think it really hides the diversity of our community, right? There is this kind of common perception of Asian Americans as all one thing, whether it's that we're all foreigners, that we can never truly belong, or, that we're all good at math or smart. And I think it's really important through our history to interrogate why those myths have come to be, and to really understand that we are not all the same, that we have so many different rich histories and, reasons that our families and communities came to the United States, and contributions that we have made throughout history. And I think the more that we're able to illustrate that in the classroom, the more empathy students will build, as Representative Gongershowitz was saying, and the more that they'll be able to relate to people from different backgrounds.
And before we let the two of you go, Representative Gongershowitz, District 65, the Evanston-Skokie Elementary School District, facing a lawsuit from a teacher about its racial equity-based teaching initiatives. There have been other similar instances of these in the news as of late. How concerned are you about the pushback to these efforts?
Well, I can't speak to the details of this particular lawsuit, but what I will say is it's absolutely critical that we create an inclusive environment for all students, one where every student has the ability to thrive. And that's what TEACH is really all about. I know it's fair to say that there are probably some people who are more comfortable teaching a narrower version of American history, but I believe that the next generation will be better served by learning a more comprehensive understanding of American history, one where even marginalized voices are included in that history. Empathy ultimately comes from understanding, and we cannot expect to do better until we know better, and the best weapon against ignorance is education.
Okay, and that is where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to Representative Jen Gongershowitz and Grace Pye for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Up next, a look at why Latinos are much more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. That's a conversation from Saturday's Chicago Tonight Latino Voices with host Alex Hernandez, of Univision. Please stay with us.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/daily briefing and sign up.
Latinos are 50% more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease than non-Latino whites. Yet, they are far less likely to seek treatment or help. The brain disease, for which there currently is no cure, takes a terrible toll on those who have the disease and those who care for them. And as the Latino population ages, by the year 2060, some 3.5 million Latinos are expected to be afflicted with the disease. Joining us now to share their insights are David Marquez, professor in the Department of Kinesiology and Nutrition at the University of Illinois at Chicago and leader of the Latino core of the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center, and Dr. Maria Carolina Mora Pinzon, a preventive medicine physician and scientist at the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Welcome both. Thank you for being here. And I want to start with you, Dr. Mora Pinzon. Obviously, there is much that we still need to learn and know about the disease, but what do we know as to why Latinos seem to be more susceptible to getting this disease?
One of the things that we know about this disease is that it has, there are many things that affect it and increase the risk. For Latinos, we have higher risk of having diabetes, high blood sugar, high blood pressure, and we are more likely to have these diseases that are not controlled. We know that a higher risk of cardiac diseases increases the risk of having Alzheimer's. But there are many other factors about that how we grow old that affect our risk of Alzheimer's disease.
Professor Marquez, I read that Latino families, for example, are less likely to put a loved one with dementia in a nursing home. Why do you think that is? Is it cultural or simply an issue of lack of healthcare access?
For the most part, what we know is that it is cultural. We have data with older Latinos who have taken care of a loved one with Alzheimer's disease. And the bottom line is nobody can care for my loved one the way we can. And a lot of that is cultural, from the connections within the family, those strong bonds that cannot be broken. And it's also with the care facilities. If the person is monolingual Spanish, maybe there aren't facilities that can appropriately care for them, or understanding the person's background, where they're coming from. Those can all influence whether or not somebody enters a care facility.
Doctor, for a family member that suspects that perhaps their spouse, maybe their mother, father, might be suffering from Alzheimer's, how do they distinguish between Alzheimer's-related memory loss and the memory loss, for example, that's just part of the aging process?
That's an excellent question, and one of the things that is important to have a discussions with the family. Sometimes it's normal that, I forget where I put my glasses today, or hey, I spent 5 minutes looking for my keys. The problem is when these type of memory issues are happening every day, to the point that they are affecting our abilities to do activities or to get out to the world and connecting with others. If at any point, like things like, hey, I left the stove on, or I got lost, I went to the market and I forgot what I was going to get. When those things start to happen regularly, it's a sign to an alarm that we should talk to a doctor and see what's happening.
And seek help, definitely. Professor, going back to you, there is no cure for Alzheimer's at the time, as we know. What appears to be the most effective way to help people who have the disease? What kind of treatments or therapies are available?
At the front end, I would say prevention, right? Or reducing our risk or our chance of getting Alzheimer's disease. So the more physical activity that we do, there is a lot of data that it reduces our risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. And also nutrition and the kinds of things that we eat. The MIND diet, for example, which is a combination of a Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet for hypertension, really focusing on green leafy vegetables and berries and nuts and better kinds of oils. All of these things help reduce the chance that we will get Alzheimer's disease.
Doctor, Speaking about treatments, a new drug for Alzheimer's called Aduhelm that is supposed to slow cognitive decline has faced some criticism. This week, actually, they've changed the guidance on who should get this drug. The FDA now says it's only appropriate for people with mild cognitive impairment. What do you make of this drug?
Well, one of the things is that the controversies are associated with the who was part of the study. And we all can agree that we want something that we can offer our patients. We want something that could give us hope. But we need to make sure that the right studies are there. We need more data on how this medication works. We need more data on the long-term effects. And we need more participation of Latinos, African Americans, Native Americans in those studies to make sure that the medications provide the effects and the benefits to everybody and not just to a small group.
Professor, we have less than 30 seconds, but I just want to ask you this very last question. What help is there available for family members who we know also suffer from the disease?
I would say look into resources that potentially offer bilingual resources. Home care aides might be available to help with work around the house. Other respite care where a caregiver can get some time on their own.
David Marquez and Dr. Mora Pinzon, thank you both for joining us today. Back to wrap things up right after this.
And that's our show for this Monday night.
Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Senator Dick Durbin is here to talk about voting and police reform bills, plus an update on infrastructure negotiations.
And a traditional instrument adds South American rhythms to a modern jazz combo. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports free educational initiatives in the legal profession.